Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you to our Engaging Youth in Our Work webinar. I just want to let you know that we're going to start in a couple of minutes. We're going to wait to see if we can get some more attendees to show up, and we'll start at 9:30. All right, so welcome again. My name is Gina Rodriguez, and I am the project manager for the Community Health Training Institute. I want to welcome you to this webinar, Engaging Youth in Your Work. In a second, the presenter will introduce herself, but I wanted to give you a little bit of information about how this webinar is going to work today. So on the right-hand side of your screen, you're going to notice sort of a taskbar, and one thing that you're going to be using throughout this webinar is the questions box. So if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to type them in the question box, and our presenter is going to also be asking you to answer some of her questions, and you're going to type them in that question box as well. Immediately at the end of the webinar, you're going to see a survey pop up on your screen, and we are going to highly encourage you to fill out that survey because that's going to help us improve our webinars in the future. And also we encourage you to follow us on Twitter at HRA Institute and hashtag MA Coalitions. We will be live tweeting throughout the webinar. This is what the question box looks like on the right-hand side of your screen. Again, I want to welcome you, and I'm going to hand it over to our presenter to introduce herself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Daisy Ortega. I work here at Health Resources in Action. I actually serve as the director of the Community Health Training Institute, but I'm excited to wear my Youth Development Youth Champion hat this morning. So I'd like to thank you all for being here and joining us for this webinar. So again, like Gina mentioned, the title of this webinar is Engaging Youth in Your Work. And here are some learning objectives so that we can ground ourselves on what I'll be able to cover with you all, and I'll leave opportunities for you all to ask questions and give comments, so we may be able to dabble in other pieces. But basically, by the end of this webinar, I hope that you'll be able to identify levels of youth participation, and there's a particular framework that I will probably introduce or reintroduce to some of you on what that looks like. Also, while providing examples of youth participation in relation to your work. So I have some examples from my own experience and also from what we've seen in the coalition and community health world, and I would love for you all to give your input as well. And then last but not least, I'll give you all an opportunity to really not just share questions and some ideas that you all have for engaging youth, but with the hope to identify strategies to include more youth voice and choice into your work. So those are just general objectives to ground us in what's going to happen this morning. So here's the agenda and flow. So we are at the welcome, and I will do introductions in a bit. And then I'll spend a little bit of time talking about what is youth development. It's important to talk about the approach of positive youth development so that not only are we engaging youth, but we're retaining them. So it will be addressed in this section in terms of what are some things to keep in mind in order to authentically engage youth and have them at the table. And then I will be reviewing the levels of youth participation and also forms to get ground for you the work that you're doing with youth, especially for those that are already engaging youth, but also giving you some ideas on how you can bump it up to the next level. And then I will give quite a bit of time for you all to think about the self-assessment of youth participation, so having you think about your own coalition or program and how you can engage youth. We emailed a handout ahead of time, but even if you just joined us today, there is a handout in the handout section that's called Program Functions Resources. I will be referencing that later, but you're welcome to open it and view it at your leisure. But that self-assessment section is what I'll have you think about components of your own work and how you're engaging youth and how you can further engage youth voice and choice. And then lastly, just to ground us in just some good old-fashioned advice on how to build relationships with young people, which is the core of engaging youth and engaging communities in general. So, and then we'll head to close. So that is the agenda for this morning, and I welcome questions or comments throughout the presentation. Please feel comfortable to do so. And actually, to get us started, I would love for you all to find the questions box in that panel that you have on the right there. And I would love for you to introduce yourself. So say your name and your role at your organization, coalition, or program. At what level do you work with youth now? And if you feel so inclined to share what you do with youth. And just some initial thoughts on, as a young person, and you can decide what age, can you think back to a time where you felt like you mattered? So you felt really important and a part of a process or a conversation or a decision. So I'll give you a chance to think about those questions. Only I can see the responses, but I will read them as they come in. So again, introduce yourself, your role in your organization as well, how you're working with youth in what way, and also thinking back to a time when you were a young person where you felt like you mattered. So I'll give you a chance to respond to those questions. Awesome. The answers are pouring in, so thank you all so much for that. I'll give you all a couple more minutes to introduce yourself and your role, how you work with youth, and a time that you felt like you mattered when you were a young person. And then I'll respond to those. Sorry, I'll read those for you all that cannot see me. Awesome. So we have Michelle here, who's working in Austin Brighton, CDC, also Elizabeth from the Boston Public Health Commission, who currently doesn't work with youth and is a program coordinator for the Health Equity Office. Loving the various experience with youth, and this is the right place to be. Lindsay works at a school-based populations office to improve pediatric health. Welcome, Lindsay. And back to Michelle, is working with youth. It is more in terms of hosting community events, which is awesome. And we have Timothy here. Hello, Timothy, or Tim. And they're doing work in North Adams and engaging youth as advocates through a county-wide youth collaborative. And Tim is sharing he felt like he mattered when he was in conversations where adults really valued his opinion and engaged with him in meaningful conversations. And they were genuine, which is awesome. We have Young here from Worcester, doing some collaboration work with a local coalition that engages youth. We also have Cassie here from Grand Rapids. Hello. and working with youth on tobacco-free living, which is awesome. They perform tobacco litter cleanups, messaging, and advocacy. So a lot of high levels of youth participation, which is awesome. We have Lena here, who is not currently working with youth, but has worked with them in the past. Awesome. Thank you all for your responses so far. These are great. We have Elena here, Kansas Academy of Family Physicians, starting to collaborate with youth in the summer to create tobacco-free parks in Wichita, Kansas. That's awesome. Cool. I'll let folks to continue to reflect on these questions. This is helpful to know who's in the webinar in terms of kind of the experience and the questions that you all may have. Love to hear how you all felt like you mattered, and hopefully you can think of a time. It's fine if it's hard to reach for that. I mean, it's not fine in the global sense, but it's fine if you can't think of something right now. So we have Elizabeth here saying they felt like they mattered when they had a teacher in high school that took time to personally help them with college applications, which is awesome. So that's a form of relationship building, going out of our way to really support youth. So we have Kayla, who works in affordable housing and works with youth on community activities. Awesome. So I'll give a few more folks to share some additional thoughts. And of course, as they come to you, you can feel free to add more. But any other memories of how you felt like you mattered? So we hear getting support on college, applications, having meaningful conversations. We have Delaney here, who works in affordable housing in Austin, Brighton. It's hoping to get youth involved, has always worked with youth in the past. And the time that they felt like they were valued as a child is when they got in trouble, and instead of being yelled at, a teacher took time to take them aside and ask them why they acted out. Awesome. Awesome. Some good positive youth development approaches here. So I'll let you all continue to give input, and I will reflect them to the group as we go along. We have one more piece here from Michelle, and then I'll keep rolling along. But Michelle mentioned here a time that they felt like they mattered was when someone sent them a thank you card after they volunteered at an event. Ooh, that is an old tradition that unfortunately is not sustaining for too long, but that's wonderful. And then we have Muriel here, not currently working with youth, but wants to explore ways to engage youth on wellness issues through their wellness workshops that are open to adults. If there are ways to engage youth before the age of 18, they're looking for opportunities to do so. Awesome. You've come to the right place. We have a lot of experts in the webinar, and I'll share some experiences and some frameworks to help with that. So thank you all for giving that input. Feel free to continue to do so. I'll include it as well, but I want to get started with the content here. So just to ground us in this framework of what is youth development, it's a term that gets thrown around a lot, but it's important for us to start and get us on the same page. So we believe here, Health Resources in Action, that it's an approach that you do with youth. It's also a stage, something that youth go through, but it's also an approach in the sense where it's something you do intentional with youth, that it focuses on building outcomes for them, so skills, knowledge, attitudes, aptitudes, necessary for them to succeed today and tomorrow when they're older, whatever that may be, a couple years, 20 years down the line. And it's an asset-based approach. It's based on their capacities, what they already bring, what their strengths are, informative needs, which is naming that we have young people at different places. So you may have a 15-year-old that behaves very differently from another 15-year-old. That's very normal, but it's important for us to be aware of those differences and really kind of calibrate our work and our interactions with them according to that. So in essence, what we hope not only that you're doing in engaging youth, but that you bring this approach to working with youth is youth are not just recipients, they're also resources and folks you can actively engage in your work, which is why you're here, having them, giving them opportunities to be at the table. The goal is not to fix youth, right? It's to develop them. So like anyone else, young people do have struggles and barriers, but through the community work, through the engagement, through the high skill building activities that you engage them, it actually helps them develop problem-solving skills and mattering feelings that can help them hopefully apply those to other parts of their life. And also, it's important to keep in mind that prevention problems do not by itself promote development. So again, that idea that you want them at the table, even if it's not necessarily addressing an issue they have on their plate at that moment, but that all helps their growth and their development. And ultimately, it's important. We believe truly that we need to have young people at the table, not just as listeners, but as contributors and those that have not just choice, but voice in decisions that are made that not just impact them, but the community. That often we share the false kind of narrative that they are our future, as if that's the only thing they are. They are also our today, and we want to make sure that we are developing them in the way that they need to be developed. And they may do it on their own, but it's great to do it with them. So it's great to get on the same page about benefits of engaging youth and retaining them over time. And I'm sure this is why you're here, because you feel like this is something that should be valued. But just to name a couple pieces. So for the benefits for youth is, it's not only does it help them to really learn about the rich community diversity in their community, it also helps them with buy-in, and so that they're in processes from the very beginning. No matter how boring, quote unquote, we think it is, it may be really fascinating and interesting to young people to be part of processes from beginning to end or middle to end, wherever you can have them in there. It's also a way to have young people be involved and stay involved. So if you're thinking about those future participants for your work in your coalition, it's great to engage them now rather than this mythical future. And it does really help shift the power dynamic. So by engaging young people, you're already addressing a form of discrimination where often youth are not at the table. So it really challenges that level of discrimination by having them at the table. So benefits for coalitions or your programs, it not only keeps youth engaged, but it keeps adults engaged. It makes the work really interesting and fun and rewarding by having youth at the table. It's also, when young people are around and they're building relationships with adults, they are, more willing to engage with them, respect the adults because they know who they are. Not to infer that young people would disrespect adults if they don't know them, but as we all know, the deeper the relationships are, the easier it is to be in easy dynamics. And the benefits of the community are similar to the coalitions, but we throw around civic involvement and engagement a lot, and often wait for it to happen when it's time for them to legally vote or later on in their life. But we need to be engaging young people now to show them what civic involvement looks like and what they can get in return of that. It also shows the community how important it is to have young people at the table as important members of the community and contributors, because they will continue, they are also our future. That is important to keep in mind, and they will continue the work once we are no longer there. So it has many benefits for the community. It helps really bridge any gaps that may be present there. So just to ground us in some benefits there, I'm sure you already are bought in, but it's great to name those. And also just to ground it in this public health, healthy community perspective. So through Health Resources in Action work with the National Network of Public Health Institutes, we did an assessment of hundreds of organizational websites about what healthy communities means to them. And as you see, it has broad definitions of health, shared vision, But right there in the middle, we have investing in youth leadership and development. As you can tell, this is the only specific population that's named in this vision for healthy communities. Not to say that other populations are not important, but that often we leave young people out of the picture and the page, and we're missing out completely for the benefits that I mentioned previously. So just kind of wanted to ground us on that healthy communities for all vision statement. And moving into some tips and strategies. So for some of you, you asked for this. For those that are newer in this, for some, this may be a good refresher or reminder. And I also welcome additional input that you may have, maybe some that I'm missing here. So if you're trying to think about how do I engage youth, first and foremost, you have to create youth-friendly promotional materials that describes the purpose of the meeting or the event or the program. If you don't know what youth-friendly means, can you bring a group of young people together? Can you ask family members that are young people, hey, what would engage young people? What would catch their eye? And it's important to also use images that reflect the community that you are in. So that's just one way to do it. And there's other ways also to convey it, but it's important that if you create an awesome youth flyer, are you posting it in spaces where young people are? It's only as good as who gets access to it. So it's important to think about where are young people, like a local food shop, or maybe the mall, or here in Boston, there's a lot of train stations that are very popular, have a lot of youth traffic. So those are places to give out the flyers. And the next piece, and if you'll notice, these are all strategies that work with adults as well, but we want to make sure we name it with youth in mind. Do young people know what's expected of them? So making that clear, not to make the flyer too busy, but more so to convey that when they're asking, oh, what's this about? Why, what's in it for me, which is the next piece too. We do want to highlight what's in it for them, and I'll talk a bit about what could be some examples of that. But it's important that young people do want to get engaged, but they may need a little more of a hook to get them at the table, mainly because they're not usually invited to adult-only spaces or adult-dominated spaces, so they may go into it cautiously. That doesn't mean they're not interested, but it's important to keep that in mind. And like I mentioned, it's important to promote where youth are, and don't be afraid to use social media to promote. But if you're not friends with young people, it's going to be really hard to engage them in that way. So think about adults that you are promoting with. Do they have access to youth that they can spread the word? And then just some kind of quick tidbits on the right there. We have to think about location. If we're having meetings or events, is the location consistent? Is it always at the same place? Whenever you switch it up too much, it may become really difficult to keep young people, engage them in the first place and keep them engaged. Is it accessible? Can they get there on their own? If you don't have public transportation, if it requires driving, is that something you're considering? Also, is it a youth-friendly space? Some spaces require IDs to get in, or it may be a very overwhelming looking building or neighborhood. So it's just things to think about. And the youth-friendly piece, again, ask young people in your life what they consider youth-friendly. Scheduling, it's important to try to be flexible. So young people do want to get engaged, but we want to think about, if you do want them at the table, are you offering meetings after hours, after school, on the weekends? A meeting on Wednesday at 10 a.m. in the morning is not really going to engage young people, especially if they are in school. So these are things to consider. And sometimes we do need to be flexible and change the time that we offer it. So it's great to meet their needs in that way. And young people not only have their own children, but are caring for siblings and other children in their lives. So if it's possible, offering childcare is something else that will not only get them engaged, but will keep them engaged. And then some additional kind of engagement and retention strategies for those that are thinking about how do I keep them coming back, but also how do I have them come in the first place. Food. That gets me at most places also. So it works with adults equally. But young people, they need to be fed, and it doesn't make their participation less authentic. They sometimes go through their whole day without having a real meal or a good meal. So it's great to offer food if you can. And if you want to keep them engaged over time, or for, or if the engagement requires a lot of their time, consider naming and offering volunteer service hours. Young people, if they are in school, and in most high schools, maybe even middle school, have volunteer service hours requirements, and this is a great way to do it. And also you can offer it as school credit. I've had high school young people engage in my programs, and I would say, yes, these are the hour commitments, and I'd be happy to write a letter to your school so that you can get school credit. If young people are thinking about college or work, paid job for the next time, offer it up to them right away that this could be a way for them to get a recommendation for either of those. We can't assume that young people know that that's available. And last but not least is stipends. So if you do plan to engage young people over time, it is a best practice to not just offer them food, but offer them some type of compensation. It's a financial burden for young people to engage in things that are free. If it isn't a financial burden, then you're only including a particular population of youth that are able to afford to volunteer for free. It's something to consider. I know it's not always available with certain budgets, but you may lose young people to paid jobs that will give them less, meaning it's just kind of a menial job that they're doing just to get paid, whereas they can do so much more in your program and receive income, something. So that's just something to consider. And with some additional considerations, if you are engaging young people in an adult-only setting, we encourage you to engage at least 2 young people to start with. We don't encourage you just to engage one. It could feel like good old-fashioned tokenism in that way, to have this one young person represent a whole community. But more so, it could be intimidating to have just one young person amongst a group of adults. So we encourage 2 or more, especially if you're planning to integrate them in an adult-only group or setting, especially a group of adults who've met for a while. And again, circling back to this point, is the role of the young person clear? Do they get, not only do you want them at the meeting or the event, but do they get to give input? Do they get to make decisions? How else, and are you communicating that to the young person? Don't assume that they know and that they have free will to speak up or give opinions at their leisures. Often they're looking for permission from us to give in that way. And again, the youth-friendly atmosphere is something I want to reiterate because it's super important. That may be from the images in the area to, you see a young person walk into the space. Are you going right up to them and saying, welcome, how are you today? Really great to have you here. And also, last but not least, if we want young people at the table, especially for the first time, we also need to be committed to keep them there over time. That may mean a young person misses a meeting, and it's good to follow up with them, especially if you want them to come back. Give them a text, give them a call, or next time they come, you say, hey, I missed you last time. Is there anything I can do to help you be present? So again, engagement and retention tips. And then here are some kind of more specific, tangible communication tips on how to continue to engage young people and really have them be part of the process. So first and foremost, we do need to check ourselves and our preconceived notions of young people. Let's not assume what they care about or don't care about. Let's ask questions. Let's get to know who they are. Let's also, I think number 2 is really critical, especially if you're engaging youth for the first time or even if you're engaging them now. In order to switch the power dynamic, it's good to try to give young people specific speaking points in your meetings or events, especially if you see young people taking a step back and not speaking up. It doesn't necessarily set up a really tokenistic dynamic, if that's what you're thinking. It's more like, hey, we care a lot about what you have to say, so we want to give you the first dibs at speaking and let the adults kind of take a moment to step back and listen to what they have to say. If this is less of an issue, then don't worry about it, but I think it's important to be cognizant that some young people may not feel like they have permission to speak in certain adult-only or dominated spaces. Notice your vocabulary use, and this I had to learn when I started doing youth work. I learned, I went to grad school and undergrad, and I learned all those cool words. And not to say that young people don't know really complex and amazing words, but they are also, it's also important to try to unlearn some of that jargon that we take on, as well as acronyms. We throw acronyms around a lot and don't take the time to define it. And I have a question here from Cassie. Let me take a moment here. Yeah. So the question is, can you provide some suggestions, ideas for ways to engage youth at coalition meetings where majority adults are present? I absolutely have some examples that I will share soon, and I'll have my team here keep me honest if I forget to get to that. But I think one, Cassie, the piece that I mentioned here was, if you want to engage young people, engage at least 2. And if this has been traditionally an adult-only setting, I would just right away, we'll create an agenda, and maybe there's an opportunity in the agenda or meeting for the group to give feedback. I would right away, if you don't want to write it down, but I would right away offer it to the young people. Let's say, Daisy and Lisa, this is the question that we're talking about today. Can you think about that and give us some input? I mean, if they feel like they're on the spot, they may not answer, but it's important that by specifically asking them is a way to do that. And then I have some particular other examples that I want to share a bit later, how you can continue to engage youth. But those are some initial thoughts. Also, so picking up on 3, so notice your vocabulary use, notice those acronyms and those words, check in with people if they know, if you're on the same page about what you just mentioned. Also, ask open-ended questions rather than closed-ended. Don't talk at young people, and really, what did you think about today's meeting? Was there something that you liked? Was there something that could have gone different? So things like that. Asking them questions in a calm manner without blame. So let's say they didn't come to the last meeting. There's a difference between, hey, you weren't here at the last meeting versus, hey, you were missed from the last meeting. Is it okay? Is there anything we can do to help you be here? So rather than, oftentimes young people are engaged with by adults when they may be in trouble. So it's important to really transparently convey that you are part of our community and we miss your input and your presence, and we would love to continue to have it. And that's basically what 6 is getting at. And generally 7 is a good kind of how to, it's good to admit when you're wrong and name that for young people and all people, but in particular youth, and approaching them with respect and understanding and being clear about what you can or cannot do. And that's a good how-to for any kind of community engagement work, but in particular with youth. If you can't change the location of the meeting, if you can't just buy anything for that event, it's really clear to name that up front rather than getting them excited about something that isn't possible. So those are kind of some general and specific communication tips. I don't know if there's any questions or comments about that so far while I take a water sip break. Awesome. All right, so we're going to get into those specific examples of engaging young people, and I do have a question or comment here. Yeah. Young people are also supporting seniors, like grandparents or other senior family members. They can help motivate or inspire lifestyle change. The question is how to engage them and at what point. Um, so we will get to that now. But I think how to engage youth, there's some examples here. I think at what point determines on your capacity and your ability to engage youth authentically. So I'm actually going to jump into this framework now to give you all a chance to think about how you could engage youth at whatever level. So I'll come back to Cassie and Muriel's question, especially if I don't address it as I go through these examples. So on your screen there, you're looking at a level of youth participation model. We borrow this from Northern Ireland because there is a group there, that a council that makes decisions on laws, not just for young people that impact young people, but that impact all people. So this is a council that still exists to this day. And if you notice from the left of the chart all the way to the right, the further you go right, the power of the adult or the youth worker gets smaller and the power of the young person gets bigger. And you'll see none, tokenism, consultation, representation, participation is self-managing at the bottom, and I'm going to go through some examples of one, what that means, and two, how that manifests in the work. But I do want to caution that it's hard to put your entire work or coalition on this chart. I want you to think about particular components of your work and where it may fall and where you can engage more youth. And also, although we believe in having young people at the table and having as much power and voice, even if you're at none, if you could take it to tokenism, that is also an improvement and better than none. And so that you can, purposefully move up the chart to maybe get to participation, maybe get to self-management, but you do want to take it a bit easy. So here are the levels in detail. Level 1, none, youth are not included. So for example, maybe there's a flyer that's created for youth with no youth input. Hint, hint. That could be one way to engage young people at a very minimum. Even if you don't have youth in your group or coalition, are there youth in the community that you've seen? Are there family members that are young? I'm sure there are, that you can engage. Any youth is better than none, but in particular, when you are engaging youth, it's great to include their voice. But that's an example of none. And then we move further up, and the next level is tokenism. So this is when adults set agenda and make decisions. They may consult one or two young people, but they may not take their opinions or their views. So for example, this can show up when meetings involving youth with little time for them to give input. So this is the classic, hey, we have brought young people to the meeting, but you didn't intentionally engage their opinion, or they didn't speak the whole time. So was there another way that they could have given input? If they did not give input, do we know if they understood what we were talking about? Was it a welcome environment? The other level here is consultation. Adults consult young people within adult parameters. So I'm giving an example here, although it can show up in many different ways. There's an event set for the summer with a theme, but the content isn't set yet. You can engage youth to fill in the content and add ideas to the theme with final adult approval. So this may be the classic, you have a summer cleanup event, you have some kind of awards ceremony for your community. If you want to, if the date's already set, if you know where it's going to be held, and you're thinking about how to engage them in the content. What should the decorations look like? What should the awards be? Any other ideas that they have. That it definitely is more than tokenism, and it's more than none. And then we got more into the sweet spot of this levels of participation, which is representation. A select number of youth are put forward for their peers in collaboration with adults. So for example, you can have 2 to 3 youth that are selected to speak on behalf of the program or the project at site visits or events. So this is another kind of typical way to engage youth. They can speak about something that your coalition or group has been working on. They could be the ones to welcome the funders of the site visit folks and say, here's what we do here at this program. There are many different ways to have them be in that process. And then we get into what we most typically call youth-adult partnerships. So the participation level, which is youth setting agendas, deciding on issues and activities with joint accountability with adults. So this could be when a youth group with adults, so meaning equal numbers as much as possible, or more youth is also fine, in collaboration come up with a message for a community campaign and how they should share that message and where it should take place. This is a very classic youth-adult partnership. What's important to note about this level is that there should be equal decision-making power. If there's not equal decision-making power, then it's actually representation. It's not participation. And I'm just sharing one example. I'm going to give you some additional ones and would love to hear you all share your own examples as well. And then last but not least, this is kind of more that last Sunday, the utopia, although some of you are already here, which is awesome, which is self-managing. Youth work with little or no adult authority. So this is an example. A youth group can create a survey. They can design the plan to distribute the survey. They can interview survey respondents and develop the presentation and present it back. I encourage all of those pieces to happen in order for it to be considered self-managing. Otherwise, they're just kind of being included in different components, which is great. But if they are involved from the creation to the dissemination to the actual presentation of the learnings, it's astounding how much they walk away with and learn in that setting. And I just want to name a caveat is that we don't expect for young people to be self-managing day one that you engage them. This is something you want to work towards. Although there are some young youth that are ready to jump in and hit the ground running, it's also okay to take your time. And if you're at Tokenism, try to bump it up to consultation. Or if you're at representation, can you bump it up to participation? And again, I mean, there's many things your coalition can do or does do beyond survey collection or let's say community events. I'm taking one example and showing you how self-managing can happen. I'm not expecting you all to have young people run the coalition meetings and the budget, although that's wonderful, that's something to aspire to. But there are components of your work you can hand off to young people with the proper training and support, and they can take on and do it from there. So those are quickly the levels of youth participation. So these are kind of at what level you can engage them to do the work. I do want to review forms of youth participation. So if I gave you some examples. I have some additional ones to share with you, but I want to give you all a chance to kind of think about any questions or comments, and also I can save kind of more specific questions to talk about when I have you apply this to your own work as well. Right. So you're probably wondering how, Daisy, how can I engage them? So here are the forms of youth participation. So you can engage young people at any level. Like let's take none out of the picture because that means you're not engaging them at all. But let's say tokenism all the way up. You can engage them in many different ways. And here are some examples of those ways. Some of them I already mentioned, but here's to give you a little more texture. So one way to engage youth is choosing. So I just want to name that these are not definitions. These are descriptions of ways that you can engage youth at that level. So young people can choose which activities they wish to participate in. That may seem very small, but let's say they are coming to a community meeting for the first or second time, and you're going to have 2 breakout groups. It may mean a lot to a young person to give them the opportunity to choose, I want to talk about social determinants of health versus, maybe like healthy eating and active living. Like, you can give them the choice. That is better than none, but there's also higher levels of ways that young people can choose whether the topic of a meeting or agenda, and I'll share some other specific examples that I've seen in the community in my own work as well. Decision making. So this is a kind of a basic one here, but all often a little difficult. But young people, for instance, they can meet on a regular basis to discuss your program or coalition rules, or maybe how the meeting should be run, or what should be included on the agendas. Decision making is a wonderful way to get young people involved. Also, there's planning. Can you involve them in the planning meetings? If you do want them at the planning meetings, are you scheduling it at a time that they can attend? Are you following up with them in ways that would engage them? Assessing is another way that you can engage youth. For example, they can map their community through a asset map activity, or good old-fashioned feedback forms, asking them at the end anonymously, what did they think about the meeting? What did they think about the event? What could be better? In communicating. So I mentioned this in an example, but young people are awesome communicators and can promote your coalition or program to the community on tours, when they're passing out flyers, when they're interviewing people for surveys. And last but not least, implementing. They can be involved at many levels of implementing, whether it's leading a workshop, leading a field trip or activity. It could be recruiting more coalition members or people for your program, hiring youth or adult staff. So these are some kind of generic examples. And I may get to Muriel and Cassie's question here, but of course I'll welcome additional questions or comments. So here are some specific coalition examples that may speak to you. They're not concurrent, so they're kind of all over the place, just to give you different ideas and ways on how to engage youth at various levels. So in choosing, I mentioned this already, they can choose the questions to include on a survey. Now, maybe you want the survey to be, research-based. So give them a couple of questions that are similar. Can they choose 1 out of 3 of them? Can they choose the main topic? Can they choose the order of the survey where it makes sense? It could be around purchasing alcohol or tobacco. I've done this with my young people. I used to work in Sociedad Latina, which is in a neighborhood in Boston. And these were high school students. And what we did, we had to do an assessment of the local convenience stores to see how many junk food and alcohol ads were on the front of these convenience stores. So we worked with our local Boston Public Health Commission to have some research-based questions on this assessment tool, but we also had to make it youth-friendly because we wanted the youth to do the assessment. So we did some test runs with them to see, does this make sense? Does the order make sense? Would you phrase this a different way? So it didn't take away from the validity of the tool. It really made it more relevant and helpful in their work. Decision making, they can decide on the appropriate messaging for flyers, even where to send it, whether it makes sense to use social media and what social media platform to use. I can't keep up with the different social media platforms. If you know, young people are always on the cusp of it, and they have thousands of friends, more so than I could ever have in my lifetime. That's a great way to capitalize on their networks. Planning, they can plan an appropriate outreach approach for spreading the word. So the same group I work with, Sociedad Latina, I was planning with them which parts of the neighborhood we would go to first. Not only did the young people inform me where they had particular areas of concern for their safety in certain neighborhoods, so they said, I don't want to go to this neighborhood, I prefer to go to this one. They also told me, hey, there aren't a lot of people around the neighborhood during this time, why don't we go to the train station at this time? So they're out there, they're the ones in the community and can give us sometimes better input than we could anticipate. I mentioned this for earlier, but in assessing, they can do an asset map of their community. If you're thinking about what you can do with young people for building relationships and for building their skills, is to go out and do some asset maps. You can just Google an asset map. It can give you multiple resources. We can also send you some on how to do asset maps. It's a great way to open the world of their immediate community to youth. You'd be surprised how many things they may not notice. Also, it's a way to open the local community to you as well and to do it with young people. Communicating, you can have a young person write a letter to their local official on a pressing issue. And again, it's a way to help and work with them on their writing, but also to have them politically involved, more so in the elected official area. And last but not least, there's implementing. Young people can lead workshops in the community on a topic. It could be a short workshop, a long workshop. It can be many different topics. It really depends. So these are just kind of a splattering of different ways to engage youth. But I want you to think about a couple of things, right? Because it's great to have initiative to engage youth at this level, but it's important to think about what needs to be in place in order to do this authentically, in order to do it in a way that actually welcomes young people. So you may get kind of a deer caught in headlights look from young people, or limited responses if you haven't thought about the following things. And I think this is a great strategy for adults too. But if you want to do all those different types of ways to engage youth, are you also thinking about, skills, knowledge, and training that they may need? How much do they know about this topic area? They may know a lot, they may know a little. It's important for us to ask. How much do they know about researching and designing research questions? So yeah, they may be online, and that's also a generalization. Some may not be as much, but that doesn't mean they actually know how to look up and do research. That takes a little bit of training and support. Do they know, and do you know how to frame flyers? Who, what, when, where, why? I found that I have taught myself many things due to the things I had to teach the young people, and it was great when we learned it together. And also thinking about how to use social media responsibly. Maybe you want to talk about what's appropriate messaging and what isn't appropriate messaging for a particular campaign. Again, you can train them on effective outreach methods, and that could be door knocking, that could be, sending emails, that could be sharing flyers where people are mostly walking. And it's important to also do some presentation, public speaking, and facilitation skills. Not only have I trained young people on how to articulate their messages, when they were doing community outreach, so at that train station, passing out flyers or asking people surveys, I would walk them through, which is the administering surveys, I would walk them through maybe someone's going to be rude and how to address that situation, or maybe they don't understand your question, so get really used to repeating yourself, or does that make sense? So I would walk them through that and prepare them to what to expect. And I would go with them, even though I wouldn't be next to them, but I would go with them so we can debrief after. How did that go? What could have gone better? I mentioned asset maps as a tool to use, but it's great for anything that you mentioned. Share the purpose. Young people really want to know the why. Why do an asset map? Why is networking important? Why should I care about the built environment? What is the built environment? Also, it's great to offer training on how to write letters to the editor or elected officials, etc. It's not something that's innate. And also, if you want them to lead workshops, you probably want to sit down with them to figure out, how do you do that? Like, what is a good workshop look like? So what's an opening look like? What's the body of the workshop, and what's the closing? So easier said than done, right? So it's one thing to think of the ideas, but it's another to think about, how do I properly prepare them to do this work? And let's not assume that youth are the only ones who need this training. If you have adults in your coalition, engage them in this training as well. So that's some general examples of how to engage youth broadly in the coalition. And I believe some of you have mentioned that you also engage them in leading events. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time giving some examples of how that can look. I will also give you a moment too if you have any questions or comments so far. I welcome those as well. So, leading an event, and it could be a meeting, it could be a community, kind of big neighborhood event, it could be a cleanup event, it could be any and all of the above. This is a very typical way that groups and coalitions engage youth, because it's kind of neatly packaged and maybe this one-time thing. So here's how the forms look like in many different ways. So they can choose the venue, they can choose the food. If you don't want to give them that much, leeway, give them some options and say, hey, we're between these two venues or these two food options. What do you think? They can decide on the agenda and the activities to do, including main talking points, like what should the audience walk away with knowing. They can plan the outreach and marketing strategies. They can also give input on all elements of the planning. Even if you've done some planning without them, you can say, hey, here's a handout that I created for the event. What do you think? Does this make sense? Could it be worded a little different? Do you think it can look a little different? Also, they can be the ones leading activities, leading the icebreaker or the welcome, or do a team building event or activity. It can be any and all of the above. And also, in terms of implementing, not only can they help us set up and clean up, they can take on different roles. Can they be the MC? Can they be the person tweeting or sharing information on social media? Can they be giving out the feedback form? Can they lead a certain content piece in the event? So just some various ways here that they can be engaged in leading an event. And it's important, and for those that may be familiar or not, but through the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, which funds the Community Health Training Institute and also funds the 84, which is a tobacco prevention initiative here in Massachusetts. 84 stands for 84% of youth who don't smoke in the state. It's actually 92% now. We've had some wins in the last couple of years. They do this a lot. They engage young people at all levels in planning a one day that's training based and kind of energy raising for other youth groups. They also help plan an event at the State House every year for Kick Butts Day. So some things that we like to keep in mind, we'd like to remind you is, again, are they aware about the topic area? So they may say, yes, violence is an issue in my community, but are you kind of breaking down violence? How does violence come up in different ways? What are, what are the issues and result of violence? So we don't want to take for granted a little more training, a little more support. I'll stop right here because there's a very good question about the energy monitor. So Cassie asked that. I mentioned that at the bottom in implementing. I've had people and young people be keeping a pulse on the energy of the room. So if there's a meeting or event going on and the energy looks low, I have someone, who volunteers to do that. And basically it's their job to point it out to the facilitators, or if it's within their scope, to then say, hey, the energy's a little low. We're going to take a quick little break or energizer. But I think as someone who stands in the front of the room, it can be a little intimidating to keep an eye on all those things. So here are ways that you can split up those roles and have young people keep a pulse on that. In particular, if you're trying to engage youth, you can have them keep an eye on the energy of the room, including the young people, and whether we need to take a break or if we're getting too much in the weeds on things. So that's how I've engaged youth and adults in that role. And it helps us keep not just youth engaged, but everyone engaged, because as we can see, these are all elements that can make any meeting or event very helpful when you have as many people at the table sharing and contributing. Thank you, Cassie, for the question. I apologize for not going over that. So skills and knowledge. Let's train them on the topic. If you want them to give input on food or the space, why not have them learn a bit about the budget? Say, hey, we have like $1,500 for this event, and we have to pay for the following things, and we need to keep the following things in mind. That's a great way to build young people's skills on how budgets work and how they can build a budget for future events. Also, you can teach them, like share with them, hey, here's a website or how I look for spaces for an event, and get them started that way, and then have them take it from there. They may have their own methods on how to research for space. They may be going to religious events in the weekend and may know more about religious kind of institutions that have awesome space. They could be going to events that we don't know about. They may let us know about spaces we didn't know about. Great to train them on event design and organization. What are the pieces that are important to keep in mind when designing an effective event and an effective outreach and marketing strategy, and as well as presentation and public speaking skills comes up here again. So I think when I was reading the registration report, I was noticing that people are interested in engaging youth, but you're also interested in retaining them. And this is really the crux of it all. If we're not thinking about how to train youth or how to get them involved authentically into situations, we may lose them along the way because we didn't do the due diligence to keep them like really deeply involved. So it's important to keep in mind the skills and knowledge and training they may need to help us slow down a bit and think about, oh, I never went over, how to manage a budget or how to pick food. Like, have you thought about different allergy considerations to keep in mind? And maybe they have, but sometimes they don't. So those are some additional examples of how to engage youth, and the levels vary. So I want to spend some time having you think about your own work, but I also want to pause. I've gone over a lot of information and see if there's any additional questions or comments regarding any of the information I've gone over. So, and again, questions are welcome, but I wanted to review what we're going to do now, which we're going to spend a little bit of time on this, about 15 minutes or so. So you were emailed this handout. It's also attached to the GoToWebinar in the handout section, so you're welcome to open it up. If you are near a printer, you can also print it out if you want to jot down ideas. And don't worry, we're going to email this PowerPoint to you so you can reference back to it. So this is a chart that may or may not be helpful, but I wanted to walk through it. So on the left there, you'll see forms of youth participation, so choosing through implementing. And at the top there, that top row, there's different examples of program functions. So these may not all apply, but this is a great way to kind of break down all the pieces that you do in your coalition work or your programmatic work. So one is governance. Is there a group that makes decisions for your coalition or program? Do they meet and decide, what issues your coalition will work on, what events to do in the year? That could be a place that you want to plug young people in. I work with this after-school program here in Boston for 2 years because they were interested in engaging young people in their board of directors. So after 2 years, they have successfully done so, and they have 2 youth that sit on the board that give input and have voting rights and make decisions like the rest of the board of directors. So that's an example of a way to engage them in very high levels of involvement in governance. There's also planning meeting design. So I am sure that there's a lot of meetings that you do. So is there a way that you can engage them there? Levels of involvement is just kind of a catch-all category. You get to decide at what level you want to engage them in the entire coalition or program's work, in a piece of the work, whether it's the events or the community outreach or the budgeting. You want to keep that in mind. And there's also a category for day-to-day decisions. And that gets more nuance, right? So maybe it's distinguished with planning meeting design because there may be some day-to-day decisions you're responsible for that go beyond planning meetings. There's also community outreach and engagement, and then last but not least, coalition or program evaluation. So what I want you to do is reflect on your program or coalition, and I want you to think about one of these program functions. You don't have to do all. In fact, it could be very overwhelming. And I want you to think about how you would like to engage youth. So at the left there's choosing, there's decision making. And I want you to think about and or jot down what are some ways you can engage them for the first time in that particular program function. Or if you already engage them, how can you bump it up? So if they're mostly choosing or if they're assessing, is there a way you can get them to make decisions or implement a little bit more? So I'll give you a chance to reflect on this. Think about some ideas because I would love for you to share your ideas and in particular any questions or barriers that you may have in engaging youth or in thinking about this for your own work. But I'll give you a chance to reflect on this. And of course, if you have any questions about the chart, feel free to let me know. So again, for those that maybe have stepped away, I'm giving you a chance to think about this for your own work. Can you think of a new way or an improved way to engage youth? Is it choosing? Is it assessing? If you find the chart helpful, you can think about it in this way, or you can jot down some ideas if you have it printed out. It's in the handout section in the GoToWebinar. So what I would love to do now is have folks share some ideas of ways that you plan to engage youth for the first time, things that are kind of coming to you now, or ways that you plan to bump it up a little. So for some of you, you are engaging youth. Did you get an idea of how you can engage them at a higher level? And I would love to hear those ideas. And in particular, if you're feeling stuck, I want to hear that question or barrier that's preventing you from thinking about how to engage them. So I'll give you a chance to type those in now because I'd love to share your ideas and also share your questions. All right, we have some ideas or questions pouring in. I love it. So we have Tim here who would like to involve young people more in planning processes for the next year's programming. This past year was my first in the program, so my opportunities to do so were limited. Absolutely, and those are real kind of caveats to keep in mind. And if you're doing this for the first time, and this is a great way to do it. So often people get stuck because the youth that they want to engage, they don't know if they're going to come back next year. Youth input is youth input. Okay, so if you can get a group of youth together in the summer to give input on planning for the following year, awesome. It actually may get them to come back even more. But if they're not the ones who come back, that is still youth input. That is still youth involvement, and it's just as valuable than not having them give input at all. So thanks for that idea. And of course, it does take a little bit of time to think about how to do it. So I'd be more than happy to share some tips and strategies after the webinar to think that through, Tim. So Michelle here said, she thought about movie nights they've been trying to implement. They have a database that tells them the age of the population they work with. So maybe calling a few young people to help in the planning, meeting design, specifically choosing and planning what movie to watch, what day, time, what foods you should have. Absolutely. Absolutely. So if you, Michelle, if you currently don't engage youth, you can start with the people in your current program and coalition. Do they have young people in their life? Can they think of youth to engage? And that could be your low-hanging fruit. And this is the group of youth that can help get you started on figuring out what movies, where, what time, what food. Those are great. And if you have a lot of youth, and well, you could also think about doing a flyer if you want to open it up. If you end up having a lot of youth who are interested in wanting to be involved, let's say 10 young people, you can split them up into committees. So you can have one group of them think about the type of movies and where. You can have the other group think about the types of food and other things they need for setup. You can feel free to break them down and you can have them choose which group they want to be in so that you're working off of their strengths and their interests. So Young also mentioned for intergenerational activity, timing is an issue as seniors are usually active during the weekday and in the morning while youth are at school. Yes, that is a real barrier. I think one, and this may be in a way you're thinking about it now, young people are off in the summer. Some of them do work. Some of them do have internships. But the summer may be a way to bring both elders and young people together. I think also there's some young people, and I don't know where you're located, Young, there's some young people that get out of school really early, so there may be a middle ground that you may be able to find. But for true intergenerational collaboration, it will take some finessing and figuring out how to bring them both together as much as possible. If this is an ongoing work that you want to do, for instance, I worked with this group at the Museum of Science in Boston, and they had high school students who co-led tours with elders who are volunteering. They co-led tours for elementary school students. The way that it worked is that the Museum of Science had a collaboration with the local school. So every Wednesday, the youth got bused to the Museum of Science. They got trained a little bit that morning and paired up with their elder or their elder adults, and then they led tours that day. So it was one day a week. So it is possible to do it more long term. Of course, this program has been doing it for a long time and it had other pieces put in place, but it is possible. But I think not just weekdays, but can the elders come out on the weekends if possible? And then we have Michelle here in terms of planning, helping identify what will be needed, where to access these resources. Absolutely. I mean, I think some of those questions will depend on what you're interested in doing and then from there you can figure out what do you need in place. So, again, I'd be happy to help you think through this movie night and how to engage young people. But often the first step is engaging youth, getting them at the table, and then figuring out from there. They may have a lot of ideas. They may be doing movie nights in their school or in their community, so they may walk in with a lot of those experiences and resources. You're very welcome, Young. And then, yes, of course, Michelle, that's what I'm here for, to share some additional thoughts of what I've seen in communities. So just give folks a couple more minutes here. If you have any questions, is in particular a challenge that you're thinking about that's still making it hard for you to think of ideas on how to engage youth. And even if you email them later and think about them later, I'd be more than happy to respond. But I hope that you use this tool as something that's helpful. Bring other decision makers from your coalition and your program together. Have them think about how they would like to engage youth. And if you already have youth involved in some way, have them take a look at this and say, hey, is there other ways that you would like to be involved in how we do work? They may need some more coaching and explanation on what governance looks like for your program. But it's important to bring them to the table. You never know if they may show interest that you weren't expecting. I think the last piece I want to mention about this, and I have a few more slides to go over, is I really appreciate, we all appreciate how much you're thinking critically about engaging youth. As you know, especially for those that do this, engaging youth takes more time and more effort. So it is something that could have you planning a little longer, thinking a little more critically. And so I just want to honor that it is more work, but the rewards are immeasurable and really great because the purpose of engaging youth is not just so that they can be involved and maybe they remain involved, but at the core of it all, we have to believe that our programs, our coalitions, and our communities are better when young people are involved because they do make it better. They are a very important stakeholder in this work. So just to leave you with some kind of grounding concepts here of working with youth, and some of these I mentioned, some not so much, but it's important for us to listen to young people, truly listen, and stop ourselves from taking over. You may ask them a question and they may stare at you blankly and not know what to say. That doesn't mean they don't have anything to share. That may be the first time they've been asked a question to give input. So give them a chance to respond or say, think about it and get back to me. Always encourage them to step up. There may be some young people who are ready to step in a leadership role. There may be some that are super shy and don't raise their hand. You want to offer these opportunities to all youth and not just those who are ready and willing to do it all the time. This also means you want to hold high expectations. So yes, there's some considerations and accommodations we want to make to engage youth, but we don't want to lower the bar. It is very possible for young people to come up with agendas and lead activities, etc. Want to pause here. There's a question or comment from Jenna. I work for a nonprofit. We are considering having junior board members, but aren't sure if that's the right way to proceed since those meetings are very business oriented and may not be of interest to youth. Yeah, so I don't know what the purpose of the board would be. I think one, and I mentioned this earlier, let's ask young people first before we assume what they may or may not be interested in. And if we're talking about meeting basic human needs like food and shelter, young people have a huge vested interest in this. They may be struggling or helping someone else figure this out in their own life. I think whether they'd be interested to sit in a 2-hour meeting where they get talked out and no decisions are being made, that's something else to consider. We want to think about meetings that we bring people together. Are people making decisions? Is it something that's active? Are people engaged in conversations with each other? Are they coming up with ideas? Anyone, in particular young people, would be very excited to be part of those meetings. But if these meetings or this board kind of is more of a business update and has little opportunities for input and thoughts, that's when it gets a little tricky. It's very easy for young people not to be engaged, especially if they don't think that it's important for them to be at the table, that they're not sharing opinions. So it's all about how those meetings and how that junior board is designed, which is important to think about. And again, I don't want to discourage you from engaging youth. In fact, this is a great way to start. I think it's important, though, to think about, again, the role of the young people and how they will be involved in this board so that it's not just sitting and being updated on things that are going on, and more so being active and giving input. So again, I'd be happy to give more input after the webinar, but I appreciate your willingness to think about this. It's really important to engage youth in those conversations. And just to finish this up, it's great to, of course, exercise understanding and be patient. Speaking of engaging youth, sometimes young people don't know that they look bored when they're actually really interested. Sometimes this is referred to as the resting mean face, as more appropriately termed. I've had to talk to a couple young people about, hey, you look really bored or mad when you sit in this meeting. Is everything okay? Sometimes they don't know that that's their affect. So just keep that in mind. Ask questions. They may be told for the first time that that's what they're projecting. That's some of the work that we have to do with young people. They have less, thankfully, I think in a lot of ways, they have less time and practice being trained to be a very docile and, showing the interested face as adults do, because we've been trained to do that way longer than they have. I appreciate their honesty and their willingness to show when they're bored or uninterested. I think sometimes they may do that inadvertently, so it's great to check in with them and say, hey, like, I just want to make sure that everything makes sense. Like, is there something I can do different? And if you ask them that, make sure you take in their input. And last but not least, if you've never worked with youth or continue to and you're wondering about this, always be authentic. Be yourself. Building relationships with youth does not mean you got to fake the funk to be cool, quote unquote. They can see right through you if you're not being authentically yourself. So if you're from a different part of the world or the country that this young person's never heard of or had experience, be that person. Educate them. Share with them what you care about, because all they care about is having an adult that truly cares about who they are as a human being and that they want them to be well and healthy. They don't care if you use the most recent lingo. You may use it to be funny, but you have to be authentic and be yourself. And last but not least, you have to have fun. And this is great for adults too, but it's important to have fun. Include team builders and icebreakers and put in a break and have a laugh here and there. That's what life is about. That's what this work is about. And just some additional tips here. If you're going to involve young people on an ongoing basis, provide structures for one-on-one interaction. So if you're involving a couple of youth, even several youth, make sure that you're checking in with them one-on-one. Hey, how do you think the meetings are going? How did that event go? You want to have some connection with them because they may not be forward with you about it, and share, I didn't think that movie was a good choice. I didn't think that agenda or that meeting was really effective. So really find those times to check in with them. And I mentioned this already, allow time for team building, especially if you're including youth for the first time. Give them a chance to build team with the adults and get them all to get comfortable with each other. Allow time to get to know them and listen. You could do this via team building, but these are also the one-on-ones. And after the meeting's over, just check in with them. How's it going? How's that test going? Or you say you were looking for a job. Have you been successful? I see that you changed your hairstyle. Like, what made you change it? Like, find the time to get to know them. Allow time for creativity. That young people are very awesome and think outside the box because, again, they haven't been trained as long as we are to get used to the funding limitations and the community dynamics, and you have to do this paperwork. Yeah, they may come up with ideas we haven't thought about because we're so worried about the barriers that are in place. So keep yourself open to it. Don't disregard it. And allow room for mistakes, not just from them, but from you as well, especially if you're engaging them for the first time. You want to give yourself an opportunity to try this out and be honest and say, hey, this is the first time I'm engaging you, so I would appreciate feedback and thoughts on how to do it better. And again, of course, I have to say that again, have fun and laugh with each other. That's what it's about. That is what keeps young people coming back. It's to be in a space where they're welcome wholly for who they are, that they're not having to check a piece of themselves at the door, and that they're engaging with adults in a loose and unstructured way. Often, most of their interactions with adults are in school, and it's always go to this class, learn this topic, go to the next class, go to lunch, don't talk. So when they have opportunities to just break bread with you, laugh about the recent episode on TV, or talk about an interesting meeting that happened with this neighbor who had some colorful opinions about things, that's what it's about, right? To just be with them. So sort of general kind of tips and strategies there to bring you here to the conclusion. Of course, if there's any additional questions or thoughts, please let me know. If not now, but later. So my last words here of wisdom is, and I mentioned this already, well, kind of, but it's important that no matter how nervous or self-conscious you are about engaging youth, please know this. Every young person just needs someone who's absolutely and madly in love with them. Like either what their interests are, what they're into, what they want to do with their life. So even if the meeting didn't go as well or that activity didn't go as well, if you want to authentically have them at the table, authentically hear their voice and their choice and their opinions, that's all that matters, you know, and keep checking in with them. I find transparency works really well. Hey, that meeting didn't go as well. What did you think? What can we do better? I think that those have been some kind of tips that I've used over time that have lent some success in engaging youth. And then we have one kind of big question here from Jen. Do you have suggestions on how to bring more of this mindset to a top-down organization? Yes, Jen, you can hire me to lead a training for your team because it is a culture shift. I think for you, I mean, I was joking, but not really. You can definitely reach out. But I think if you're bought into this and you have other people bought into engaging youth, it may be engage them, bring them to a meeting, bring them to an event, and bring those folks who are not sold to those settings. So it's not tokenistic in a way, but show them how awesome it is to engage youth. It makes take time to get them to come to your side, and it may be a battle that you continue to fight. Now, if you cannot bring on youth on board until the top, quote unquote, is okay with the idea, then that's a harder kind of way to approach it. And I'd be happy to think about some strategies to find allies to authentically want to value this and value the work. But I always think touching back on the mission and the vision of your work, if anything has to do with improving communities, with improving health, with improving the world, young people are part of all those settings. And if we're not authentically engaging them at all levels, then what are we here to do, right? And that's one way I always come back to, well, what's the mission? What's our vision? What do we hope to change? Now, and then connecting it with young people, if they're at the table, they can give us those ideas. They can bring that input. And you may have to start slow and easy, or you may have to prove it to them to say, hey, it's working. Can we continue to do this? But I do want to honor that often there is challenges top down to do this in the first place and to do it authentically. I'd be more than happy to share kind of additional thoughts and comments on how to continue to do that. But I think it's a real issue in the work, but it shouldn't deter us. Our biggest role is to be advocates for young people. So I appreciate you naming that challenge. Well, that's it for me. I really appreciate you all really engaging this morning and thinking about engaging youth. I'm going to pass it off to Gina, who's going to close this out.
So I want to thank you, Daisy, as well, for leading us throughout this webinar. Thank you guys for sticking with us through and asking your wonderful questions. We just wanted to give you some information about some trainings that we have coming up. Building Coalition Capacity Infrastructure and Sustainability and Resource Planning. They're actually both happening on June 21st. Sorry for that. One is in the morning and one is in the afternoon with a networking brown bag in the middle of them between 12 and 1. So if you're local, please feel free to register. You can find all the information on our website, which is hrainstitute.org. And if you're looking to contact Daisy and ask her any questions, here's her contact information, along with an email for our training institute as well, ways to get signed up to our newsletter. You can text the number that you see on your screen. Follow us on Twitter. Follow us on LinkedIn. Stay connected because we have more great trainings and webinars to come in the next year as we look forward to planning and connecting with other coalitions. I want to thank you so much for joining us today, and we will email out all the resources that were included in today's webinar, along with the slides and the handouts. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us. But I will leave you with that. Please feel free. Please fill out the survey that's going to pop up on your screen as soon as we end this webinar. Thank you so much.